Welcome to Wait What? Sportsbiz Chat with DP and McGee, the podcast where we take a sometimes irreverent, sometimes cynical, and yes, even a sometimes serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, Tim McGee.
And I'm David Parro.
David, we got a ton to get to today. We got a great guest. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, we sure do. There's so many subjects we can choose to pick on. We know we can never get to everything, but I do think we have to start with what I think is one of the most significant sports business news stories in a decade, maybe, and that's this settlement that came out of Senior Judge Claudia Wilken, U.S. District Court for Northern District of California, regarding the big NCAA settlement that we've been discussing for a long time. And it has so many different components, and we're not going to be able to go into that much detail, I don't think, on everyone, but hopefully, we have time to share our own perspectives on this. But the basic premise of it is a $2.8 billion settlement to allow colleges to pay athletes for back pay, right? Like charges of that they weren't able to capitalize on their NIL, say, in the past, that the schools can then distribute. There's a certain time that's now under debate as to when the schools can opt into all of this. And then an annual cap of 20. This is a really hard number to say for some reason. $20.5 million per school to be able to pay their student athletes. So we've talked about on this show for several years that we thought it was coming to this. It is now here. And the interesting thing is that it is going to, a roster limit will be instituted as it relates to this. So there's so many things that I have some big concerns about. I mean, there's no surprise, I don't think, to either of us that they're now going to be able to pay schools. But what is this going to mean from a competitive balance standpoint? What is this going to mean for women's sports? How's it going to interact with Title IX? And what's it going to mean for companies like Open Doors, right? Because now we have Brian Seeley in basically serving as the commissioner of that. He's a former MLB executive that was dealing with some pretty major issues in terms of looking at hot button issues like sports betting and so forth, and basically being the hammer guy when things went bad. So he's going to be in charge of this new commission. He's the CEO of this. And Deloitte's going to be involved managing basically an NIL clearinghouse. And I have to get your take on this. The name just cracks me up. I feel like we're talking about a new cable station. NIL Go is the new clearinghouse. So I'll stop there, but there's so much to this. And it's, so much has been leading up to this point. We finally have this ruling, and man, things are moving fast.
ESPN was actually in the running to take over that, and they were going to call it ESPN. I remember when I was in college, we used to get, I think, $10 a day in per diem when we traveled, and they would wash our practice clothes. And I thought I was living large. I thought I was probably disqualified from being in the Olympics because I was taking benefits. It's crazy where we've become. Yeah, $2.8 billion to be distributed to student athletes over the last 7 years, as you mentioned, $20.5 million per year. There is some, I think there is some certainty now that was lacking in the marketplace. Certainty doesn't mean success, but I do think that everybody knows the running rules now. I do think we're going to see further down the road, I think we're going to see the NCAA playing a smaller and smaller role in the compliance portion of this, in the rules-making portion of this. I have said this before. I could envision a time 20 years from now where the NCAA is a huge event management company and nothing more. And not to suggest that running 90 championships isn't a big deal, but I think the universities and the conferences, and to a lesser extent the media companies, are going to continue to have more power, if that's even conceivable at this point. I think when we had Rick Jones on, Rick had a very straightforward proposed solution for this transfer portal, which this plays into as well, which was you get one transfer during your undergraduate years and you get another one if you choose to transfer as a graduate student. I think that still needs to be addressed as part of this bigger issue of how and when and where, and the other questions related to athlete compensation.
Yeah, I think one of the other interesting pieces in this is that There will not be scholarship limits per se, but there will be roster limits. Schools can still grant scholarships, but need to adhere to specific roster sizes. So the days of the walk-on probably gone. I think there are a lot of things that definitely are going to be changed that maybe we haven't even necessarily thought of yet.
If you look at a sideline of a college football game and you see 110 kids on each team's sideline, I don't understand the reasoning. I've never understood the reasoning behind that. Because even when you look at an NFL team, 55 on the active roster, then practice squad players, 60, 65 players, whatever it is during the week, during practice, is more than enough. So what are those? Are they just, they're taking up space? Their equipment costs money. I've never understood that. I've never understood the need for that. And I'm not saying that there isn't one. I just don't know what it is, and I've never understood it.
One of the biggest beefs I've had to that point has been those that have argued saying that the football programs, and to a lesser degree the men's basketball programs, fetch all the dollars, and therefore they should get all the money, they should get the more scholarships. Football at the Division I commandeers so many of the scholarships, so much of the scholarship available money, that oftentimes it leaves very little room. So yes, Title IX makes sure that there has to be a balance, which then puts other men's sports, or traditionally has put other men's sports, on the chopping block. I've always felt, how do you need that many scholarship players to be competitive? It's not, yes, the top programs want to try to get the best players and attract that many, and they would prefer to have them on their team than playing for someone else. But it's just, it's not making the game any more fun to watch. It's not making it more competitive. So, I'm hoping that there are ultimately some hidden positives in this. I do worry about, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, is this, when we were talking about the potential for Saban and this big, I think, LSU booster to be these co-chairs of this commission that's now a little bit on hold. That where is the voice of the student athlete? Now, there's money here, so that's good. And your point is well taken that when you played college sports, you got a $10 per diem or whatever and felt good about it. But things have certainly changed here. But I still wonder, there's this setting of what's fair market value. That's part of this clearinghouse, right? There's going to be this assessment when things come through of fair market value, and I'm not sure who's going to be controlling that. So I'm really curious as this evolves to see where the voice of the athletes will be, and ultimately, is it going to be controlled not necessarily by the schools, but by the Power 4 conferences, maybe the Power 2 conferences.
Yeah, you mentioned Title IX before, and that has been a pretty good break on schools who didn't want to be equitable in how sports were administered within their universities. I'm not confident that this Department of Education and the current administration gives a frog's fat ass about Title IX. I don't know if that will. Now we have seen tremendous growth in women's sports over the last 5 to 10 years, which I think hopefully will help the situation, but they don't have that backstop. They don't have those rules in place necessarily, because I'm not confident that this Department of Education will enforce Title IX regulations. And it will be interesting to see the first school that wants to cut a women's sport, or wants to cut scholarships, whatever it is, and then an athlete who feels they've been wrong takes it to court, and then that's going to be a whole nother series of lawsuits and delays and things like that till we come to some closure on that. I don't know. I think there is going to be a lot of unintended consequences that we see coming out of this.
There is some additional legislation that is apparently in the works in Congress, so we will see. Listen, I don't think you can blow off what you just said, because I do think it's significant. I mean, maybe in the past we could have, but there is no doubt that there is a political hand on everything that's happening right now in sports, and the college world is certainly no exception. And with Title IX being something that's administered via the Department of Education, and it being in the state that it's in, and with a future state not clearly known, but plenty of concern about it. Yes, I think you're right to point that out. What about you? What's the major story you had?
Well, as we sit here today, we are exactly 1 year to the day from the start of the FIFA Men's World Cup, which is coming to North America with matches being played in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And I think there's a lot of different spokes that come off that hub that we can talk about. One of which is the fact that there are a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, there are now calls for the matches to be moved out of the United States because of concerns with players, coaches, fans, family members, administrators, and so forth having trouble with visas because of the recent travel ban on a number of companies that this administration has put in place starting this past Monday. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't think that will go anywhere, but I do think that's something that bears watching. But more immediately, we also have the FIFA Club World Cup coming to America. And you and I were talking about this a little bit before we came on the air. Ticket sales for a lot of the matches have not gone well.
You mentioned Club World Cup in relation to the Seattle Sounders players doing somewhat of a protest against the fee structure that USA Soccer has laid out for them as a piece of their participation in FIFA Club World Cup. It made me think that, we haven't spoken barely at all about Club World Cup. It's a pretty major thing. I mean, it's a FIFA sanctioned thing. It's coming here right a year in front of FIFA World Cup. And then I realized that we hadn't talked about it primarily because nobody's talking about it. It just doesn't seem to be having the buzz that certainly that Gianni Infantino probably hoped for and FIFA management hoped for as something to lead up to the World Cup taking place across Mexico, Canada, and of course the United States next year. But I think that's a huge miscalculation, by the way. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be hosting. We've had great guests here to talk about soccer, the enthusiasm around MLS, the summers of soccer, if you will. But I think this is a huge miscalculation, like thinking that this was going to be what is helping spur interest. I don't think we need interest in getting excited about a World Cup. I'm not saying that's the only intention. We should be hosting great soccer events here on a global basis, not just our league. But there doesn't seem to be any interest in this.
And I wonder if the lack of interest, I should say, is related to American soccer fans' lack of interest, or is it the competition itself? Because the international football calendar is so chock full of competitions that it's an embarrassment of riches, if you will, for football fans around the world and here in the United States. We go back a year ago and we had Copa America here, which was pretty well received. I think there was some issues with fan security and security at matches in Miami and Charlotte. I think FIFA learned from those. FIFA, I think to a certain extent, wants to use this as a dry run for next summer because many of the stadiums that will be used in Club World Cup will be used in a World Cup competition last year. But you can't make people go to a soccer competition, and apparently some of the get-in prices at some of these matches, including what you would think would be big matches, for example, featuring Messi, they've had to drop prices dramatically to fill the stadiums. I mean, one of the things with Messi's first match is actually in Miami, and I think there is some question as to why they didn't take him outside his home market where people get a chance to see him ostensibly 17 times a season with MLS and his teammates. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. There are some good clubs playing. I'm sure it'll be good football, but I don't know. I think it's a bit of a black eye for Infantino and FIFA right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to. I'm not even trying to dump on the American soccer fan, the fan that follows intently global football, has a team in Premier League and maybe some of the other great leagues around the world, European leagues in particular. But this is a lot to follow. So for the casual fan saying, okay, I can see Messi. Now that's a bit of a surprise because you don't get that many chances to see Messi. But, and the other teams, by the way, in addition to Inter Miami are the Seattle Sounders, which we talked about just a second ago, and LAFC, I think, right? Yeah, the last year's MLS champ. So, but it's introducing an entirely new concept. And by the way, I don't think any of these seasons are brutal. MLS is in season, as we've talked about a lot. MLS is off of the regular global calendar, which we think they'll be on in 2027 after World Cup. But I don't think these are grueling schedules. I don't think anybody's particularly excited about this other than for the potential payoff. So my expectation is that I don't even think the soccer is going to be that great. But we'll see. Okay, hopefully we can fit in a couple more things before we get to guests. Did you see either the women's or the men's French Open final?
No, I heard about them.
I feel bad for you.
Well, I know the Alcaraz match
both,
in particular was unbelievable.
Yeah, I had to go on vacation and watch it on my phone, come back, catch the final. The thing went on for days, right? It was a 5+ hour masterpiece of a match between the clear two best players in the world. I'd have to go back and look, but on the women's and men's side, it both came down to 1-2.
Yeah.
1 and 2. In both cases, the number 2 seed won. Coco Gauff, an American, beat Aryna Sabalenka, who had been on a roll, is the reigning U.S. Open champion. She seemed to endear herself to the New York crowd when she won the U.S. Open. I'm going to drop a name here. I had a chance to meet her. I found her more delightful than her television persona, and she really was heartened by that reception she got in New York. She threw it all away in Paris by being a very bad sport in getting beaten by Coco Gauff, who has emerged as one of the most popular athletes, not only in the U.S., but I think globally. She's playing at a really high level right now. She battled tough conditions better than her opponent, won the match in 3 sets. But it was a good match. It was exciting. And then the next day, Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz came out. And even if you're not a tennis fan, you can't help but appreciate what this was. TNT's first attempt at this, I think they did a fabulous job. They had all the right people. Their pregame show is definitely trying to emulate NBA on TNT. Ernie was there like courtside constantly. I don't know why they didn't just say, you got to do this. If I was Adam Lesko, who did a fine job like trying to generate the excitement, but I'm going, bring Ernie on, because this show could have used it. They had Agassi and the McEnroe brothers and Jim Courier and Chrissy Everett, who's getting better and better, by the way. Even like she's being honest and she's actually funny. And of course, John McEnroe is just great. And they were mixing and matching people. So I thought overall they did a really good job with the broadcast. Some things that I would have corrected. But the tennis and the spectacle of this was just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch it, so I want to say a couple things. Not that not watching something has ever stopped me from commenting. No, but Carlos Alcaraz, I saw some of the statistics of his success at the age of 22. Blows away Djokovic, blows away Federer, right up there with Nadal. Unbelievable what he has accomplished at a young age. And then to your point about TNT, ratings were up 53% during the first week, and then I think 25% for the tournament. So kudos to them. So it's starting to look like they are replacing the NBA with some other pretty cool stuff. And to your point, Ernie Johnson's got a little free time on his hands now, right? So,
well, it reminds me of something, because, well, he does, but he's going to ESPN, and that show is staying intact, by the way. And I do think it's an interesting thing is that in the past, the distribution partner, the rights holder to broadcast, was super critical. And I'm not saying it's not, but I think we're at a point now, particularly in the social media era, where the content itself is much more critical. Now, you've heard content is king is probably an overused statement. But this idea that NBA on TNT will move, and if that show basically stays intact, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter as much as I think we always credit TNT for doing this, and I credit them for their French Open. But if the content's right, I think people know how to find it now. We're all over the place with our televisions these days, or with our phones, or with our tablets, or whatever. So I do think that's a bit of an interesting development on this. But yeah, I mean, the numbers were really good, definitely increased over last year. And these to your point with Alcaraz and Sinner, two young players that if they stay healthy will have the ability to win a lot of championships.
Can we stay on the ratings?
We can, but we have a guest that's just popped into our
All right, so
our wonderful Riverside recording.
Welcome to the studio. Well, we're going to take a break and get our guests situated, and then we'll be right back. So we are back, and as we teased before we went to break, we are really happy to welcome our guest this week. Roger Duthie is the founder of Bearfish Sports Marketing. He resides in Dubai. He has a long resume, including a great stint running sponsorships for Emirates Airlines. So, Roger, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
So, Roger, let's get started. How did a fine boy raised in a Western education in places as far-flung as the UK, Canada, and Texas, I believe, make his way to the Middle East?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I always loved to travel. You know, I was born and raised in Toronto. I went to Vancouver, which is as far away from Toronto as you can get to go to do my undergrad. From there, I did my graduate studies at University of Texas. From there, I went to the Bahamas. Always wanted to look for the next adventure, you know, the next thing. I never wanted to stay put. And I stayed in the Bahamas for about 5 years in Freeport. Had a job there. It was lovely. Loved the place. Played a lot of golf and rugby and tennis and everything else. Met my wife there. And we got married in 1998. But in around 1997, weirdly, we saw a 60 Minutes show on Dubai. And we were looking for our next move. And it just talked about the future of Dubai. And you know, it just looked really exciting. And we just said, well, we're getting married next year in 1998, so let's do it. She was a teacher. She got a job out there. I went out there and got a PR job. And the story goes on. But that's exactly how we got out there. And it was a pretty bold move. We hated it for 6 months. Big culture shock. But, you know, that was 27 years ago, and we haven't left. And now we love it. And it's home. I love the place.
Wow.
A couple things, and this has happened before with a guest, and I didn't know you had the Freeport stop. My parents lived in Freeport for a few years, actually, while I was in college. Unbelievable place to take people for spring break.
Oh,
yeah. Way better than Florida, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting connection. I was going to ask you where in the Bahamas, but you offered it up. Also, just one of my favorite offices at MoneyGram, which I was working at until recently, was the Dubai office. I love visiting Dubai. I certainly understand why you enjoy it there so much. So thank you for giving us that background. A big part of your career was nearly 20 years at Emirates Airlines, which, as most people know in this business, has come on as a major player in the sponsorship space. Give us a sense of some of the changes that you saw in that time, because that's a significant time looking at the sponsorship landscape. So kind of talk us through changes that you saw during that time, not just in the airline category, though that's a significant one, but even more generally speaking.
Gosh, well, I mean, Dubai still changes every day. You know, there was a time when maybe 10 years ago, I'd leave, come back home, and you know, you go to one route on the way to work, and that road would no longer be there, and you'd have to take a detour, and you didn't know where the heck you were. The road system's better now. But yeah, there's been a lot of changes. And you know what? At Emirates was such a pioneering airline in 1985 when they started out. And they're the first airline to have in-flight personalized entertainment systems, right? You know, the little TVs on the back of your chair in front of you. And that was the first. But Emirates was a real pioneer. So when we got into the sponsorship game really early on in the airlines industry, it was more about branding. Just throw the logo on there. Let's get the brand. Let's sponsor high-profile football teams, rugby World Cup, cricket World Cup, Dubai World Cup. You know, we tried to knock off all the World Cups because they had the most bang for your buck. So we were really concerned about getting the logo out there and getting the brand out there and getting the iconic cabin crew out there and all of our events. And that helped us build the brand to become a global airline, just to give the consumer an option to realize, oh, wait, this is an airline that exists. Oh, Dubai is going to become an option now. What is this Dubai place? How do I get there? And we were really trying to change the fan of the sport sports to become fans of the airline. And with that change, we became more fan-centric. So we really wanted to figure out, okay, how can we engage with the fans now and talk to them? And so, the change from logo placement to brand badging to fan engagement to data analytics, and we started using data more to get to know the fans, to drill down into this, who are the consumers, who are the potential consumers, what do they like to do, what sports do they like to do, how can we get them to come to our game, whether it's in London or somewhere around the world. So we really used a lot of analytics. And then, engaging with the fans, we also discovered they wanted a bit more authenticity. So it wasn't just about an airline throwing money at a partnership, but what's the relevance? So we started to look at how can we create relevant material, relevant content. So we brought the teams to Dubai. They flew in, and we started creating content on board and putting that out as social media and digital media became more relevant. And that's what we did. So, we went from sort of the logo, the brand badge and traditional media value to talking to our fans, engaging with our fans, whether it's just handing out hats or doing some things, to speaking to them more in a digital world, and then analyzing who they are and then offering them more opportunities. And then as an airline, the company went from, heavy on sport to more sport and culture. And we started sponsoring a lot of orchestras around the world. That gave us an opportunity to speak to a different audience. And then literature festivals, art festivals, music festivals. So it really gave us that opportunity to speak to the hardcore sports fan as well as the cultural fan. And that's kind of an overview of the changes of how we looked at sponsorships. Probably data and analytics became the most important thing over the years.
And man, I love flying Emirates, by the way.
I still fly it. Still my
What an experience. I know. I got to a fair amount over the last few years. I miss it.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I'm fortunate. I still fly them. It's no matter where I am in the world, when I see the flag of the flag of the UAE on the tail, it's home. No matter where I am, and I know I'm going to be at home after that. It's a wonderful.
So as we mentioned, nearly 20 years with Emirates Airlines. What are some of the deals that were either the most fun to do or the deals you were most proud of in those sponsorships?
Well, there's a few. Probably two come to mind, and I'll explain why. One is tennis. I started off with the Rogers Cup in Toronto. We were launching Toronto, so I went over to Toronto to look at my hometown. I was very excited. My first gut instinct is to sponsor the Toronto Maple Leafs, but we couldn't for many reasons, and the most important reason is they played at the Air Canada Centre, so that was a done deal. Could not do that, and hockey really wasn't for us. So sponsorships isn't about what you like to do. You have to take the emotion out of it and look at the business angle, and that's an important lesson for a lot of people. There's always the chairman's whim because he's the chairman and he wants to sponsor Tiddlywinks, so you have to sponsor Tiddlywinks. Not that Emirates did that. So we went over there and I started looking at the Rogers Cup, and we really hadn't dipped our toe into tennis. And this was the first time we sponsored a tennis event outside of Dubai. We sponsored the Dubai Duty Free here, but that was sort of because we wanted to and we were supporting that event. And this was the first sort of external tournament we sponsored, and we got the backwall branding at the Rogers Cup. And we smashed it. We just did so many great activations, and we got the crew and we had wonderful hospitality. And then that led us on to really trying to own the space because we were opening up more North American destinations, especially the States. So we wanted to own tennis, and we did a great deal with Lou Shear, then the chief revenue officer of the USTA, now the president, my very close mate. We did the Emirates Airline US Open Series, which was a series of tennis, 8 events in the summer. And we owned the hardcourt season in America, and then we sponsored the U.S. Open, the deal still exists today. So the tennis, the Rogers Cup, led on to our tennis, and now I keep saying we. I default to we when I talk about Emirates, but sorry. Emirates sponsors the 4 Grand Slams, which I was involved with, and the ATP deal, and we sponsored the rankings. And you look at any ATP event around the world, you see the Emirates logo on the net, right? My team and I did that deal, but it all stemmed from the success of that one deal in Toronto because it's my hometown and that's close to me, and it's the Rogers Cup, and it just meant so much to me that we were successful taking kind of a bit of leap of faith into tennis, and we did it right. And I guess the next one was the LA Dodgers deal. It was tough because it's in sponsorships, you have to have a champion for that particular sponsorship. And I was for tennis, and no one knew baseball in Dubai. In my world, in the office, no one really understood baseball. So I was trying to explain, look, this is the LA Dodgers. This is one of the most iconic teams in the world of baseball. We're going to try to deal with that, but I'm going to try to get something funky, something different. And I went to the Dodgers, and we had a great negotiation. And I remember saying, I want those 2 poles out in the outfield. I want to brand them Emirates Airline, the 2 foul poles. And they're like, oh, we can't do that. I said, no, they do it in Chick-fil-A. In Houston, they have it on the foul poles. And I said, it can be done. Check with the MLB, and they came back, and they went, yeah, it can be done. All right, they're yours. So we got the foul poles, and we got tons of branding at the Dodger Stadium. And that led on to some really fun activations with our cabin crew, throwing up the first pitch and some other things. So those are 2 significant deals because they just meant a lot to us as a brand, as a company. They weren't the most expensive deals in the world, but we really got good value from those deals. And that's what I like. I like the deals that are really good value and you get great return on them, but you're not spending, you're not breaking the bank. Of course, the high profile football events, you're spending a lot, and you should get a lot, and you do, but you don't spend as much and you still get a lot. That's satisfaction.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, but first, I love what you said earlier. Your first inclination was to go to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I had a yellow sticky pad or sticky note posted to my monitor when I ran sponsorships for AT&T, which said, "You are not the target audience."
Yeah.
I think. But you mentioned nobody knew baseball in Dubai or within the halls of Emirates Airlines. You have, I don't want to say single-handedly because I know that many people have been involved, but you started the Dubai Little League.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. Tell us about how it started. Tell us about where it is today. I do know that there is somebody that you know fairly well who's come out of the Dubai Little League and now is pitching here in North America at the collegiate level. So tell us about that.
Okay, so just to be clear, I didn't actually start Dubai Little League. I've been involved for 20 years. We had two American guys, Joe Labrato and Jack Greenwald, who started the league. And I came on when my son was about 3 years old, and I just got involved. And I coached for many, many years, and I got involved in the administration. I eventually became the president, and then I've been running the league for many years, even after my son left. I got Emirates to sponsor Dubai Little League when my son was young, because they're a great partner for local events and community events. So we got Emirates to support us. Dubai Little League is an amazing league. We have over 400 families. We have 27 different nationalities, including GCC nationals, Emiratis. We have the last, say, 10 years, we've had about 25 kids play D1 or college ball at the next level. We've had 5 kids play on national teams, not necessarily America or Canada, but their national teams. We've had tremendous success. And remember, our pool, these numbers are probably not sounding great to your listeners, but to have 25 kids from Dubai go play ball on the next level or play national teams from a pool every year of 400. It's not, that's total. That's total 25 kids over 20 years. That's a lot for us, not a lot for you guys, but we're very, very, very proud of our Dubai Little League and what we do over here in baseball. And now we have a full men's league, which, happy to say, I still play. We called ourselves the Savannah Bananas, and I approached the original Savannah Bananas. I approached the owner to sponsor us, and we got turned down. And I said, look, let's do a deal. We'll do some branding out there. We'll do some partnerships, and it just didn't work out for them. But we still called ourselves the Dubai Bananas. So
I think
it's good fun. All the dancing and great entertainment they do, but we just focus on ball. Then we got a slow pitch league. We've got girls softball, girls baseball. It's thriving. It's really thriving, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished personally. But with our team, we've got a great team there. And remember, it's a volunteer league. So my son left 4 years ago, and I can't leave the league because I want to keep going and watch this place continue to grow. I love it.
And where is your son now?
So my son Oliver plays at the University of British Columbia, which is a Canadian team. We got a scholarship out there, and that team is the only team in Canada that plays in the American Conference. And that team won the conference this year against against their American rivals, and then they came second in the region, which also meant they got to go to their NAIA World Series, and they were ranked in the end 11th in America. So for a Canadian team to be ranked 11th in the States, it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Congratulations on that, because that's a great story, and it sounds like a lot of people involved, but with some great leadership from you and some passion from you to put that in and love of the great sport of baseball. So that's wonderful. Okay. We have a major sporting event taking place outside of Pittsburgh this weekend, the U.S. Open, and the best players in the world will be competing for that important championship. In golf language here, there will be players from the LIV Tour and players from the PGA Tour playing. We don't want to put you on the spot in any way, but you've been involved in that sport. Obviously, LIV being funded via the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia. So from a regional standpoint, it's been significant. You were involved in that at a fairly early stage. Can you talk to us at all about how that came about? And then just maybe more broadly, your kind of thoughts on the state of golf and where you see, LIV really fitting in.
Well, first of all, I can't say a whole lot. I did start off even before LIV Golf was called LIV Golf. I was one of the early consultants. I got hired as a consultancy. I was helping the team build the commercial strategy, and I was on many interesting calls over that time. It was a wonderful concept. I think it's a great concept. I think what they did was fantastic. I think golf at the time needed a change. It really did. Keith Pelly, who ran the European Tour, which is called the DP World Tour now, who's running the MLSE, which is the Toronto Maple Leafs, etc. in my hometown, is a very good friend of mine, and we had many conversations about LIV and where golf is going, and he felt they needed a change as well. Everybody realized. So it was a great idea. It was a really good concept. They had the support of the PIF to get the players and lure the players. I think we started right by getting Phil Mickelson, who was, really, he's Phil. He's a star at that time. And just to get Phil out there playing this new tour, I think was a really wise move. I probably won't go into too many more details on LIV. I think they're doing a great job. And, I think it's just going to go from strength to strength. But I will say, I think golf's in a better position now than it was maybe a couple of years ago. It's still a little disjointed because of LIV, but the PGA is putting out some wonderful players right now. And the product, I'm a big golf fan, and I love watching golf. And I watch the DP World on the weekends, and I watch the PGA Tour, and I watch pretty much as much as I can before I fall asleep because of the time difference. I'll tape it and watch it the next morning. I think golf's in a good state. We've got the greatest player in the world right now, who's got the craziest feet in the world. I mean, he's fun to watch because of that. You got Rory in the Masters and that whole situation, and you got some young guns nipping at their heels. Great European with Aberg. I mean, you've got some really great golfers. So I miss Bryson, but I can catch him on his YouTube stuff. I don't miss some of the other guys. Overall, golf's great.
Tim and I will probably do this at the end of the show, but we like to put our guests on the spot in front of big events. Do you want to make a prediction on who you see winning the U.S. Open?
Absolutely. We're going Canada all the way. Corey Connors or Penrith. We're going Canada. This is it. You've got you just got to get hot. I mean, it's a long course. Taylor Penrith is a big ball striker. Hits the ball deep. He's a good player. Corey Connors is probably one of the best strikers of the ball in the world. One of. Yeah, I know you need to put it together. It's going to be a nasty tournament. But the boring pick is Scotty or Rory or Bryson. I'm Canadian here. I'm supporting my home country.
I heard Rory shot an 81 last week.
Oh, in Toronto, yeah, he shot an 8. He had a quad, and he just flew. I couldn't believe it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
With Rory, you think.
But I heard he shot an 81 at the Open course.
At Oakmont?
In Canada, you mean?
No. This past week when he didn't make the cut, he went and played a pre-round there and shot an 81.
Yeah,
I heard.
Yeah, that was at the.
Has he got his driver situation figured out yet? What's going on?
No, he hasn't. That was at the Canadian Open last weekend. So he shot an 81. He had a quad. I mean, he was terrible. It was bizarre. And the funny thing with Rory, everyone thought, and so did I, once he got the relief of the Masters, the career Grand Slam off his shoulders, and people just thought he was going to kill it now and smash it. But maybe he's kind of like, well, I don't know, I'm kind of good now. Well, I mean, he'll come back. Rory's such a great golfer. He'll get his driving sorted out. He'll come back. He'll come back for sure.
Take a broader look now. Oh, you've been in, as you said, you've been in Dubai since 1998,
Yeah.
97, 98. How would you characterize the region's impact on global sports, both looking backwards and looking forward?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because looking in the past, this region was very, very smart. The leadership, the government, very smart, because knowing full well the oil reserves are going to run out at some point, and they needed to diversify the the business, and the government here in the UAE wanted tourism to become a big part of the economy, right? And so they did. So they decided to build golf courses, and then they built the golf courses, and they filled it full of great players, and they built a great tournament, and tennis and football, and so on and so forth. I mean, even in Qatar, 1996, they brought over Freddie Couples to play in the Qatar Open, which back then no one would have heard of that, right? And then Monty came over, and then the Dubai Desert Classic happened, and they got Sebi, and again Monty, and then smartly Mark O'Meara tapped on the shoulder of his best buddy and said, "Hey Tiger, why don't you come on over to this place called Dubai in 2001?" And then it just took off, and it was because of sport, and it was really knowing full well that sport was going to bring the tourists, it was going to help with the infrastructure, it was going to bring another revenue stream, and it worked. And then that followed on the other GCC countries, and now especially with what Saudi's doing. I can talk about the future right now. Good segue if you don't mind. What Saudi's doing and the transformation of Saudi in the last 5 years is mind blowing. It's incredible, and every time I go over to Riyadh or anywhere in Saudi, I'm just in awe what they've done. The transformation in 5 years or 6 years is really incredible, because and by the way, it's not just about throwing money at something. It's about being strategic with what they're doing. The PIF bought Newcastle United, as you know, and that was just really the beginning. They created an investment arm called Surge Investments, which their sole goal is to purpose IP rights and to monetize stadiums and media rights and everything to invest in sport, but not just for Saudi, but for the region. And, Qatar had the World Cup, the last World Cup, and it was amazing. And now it's going to our home countries, and then it's going back to Saudi. Like, it's incredible what's happening. To have these big events and do them properly and professionally, and hosting tourists and hosting guests and hosting the professionals, the players, true blue North American over here. But what this region has done in sports and hospitality and entertainment and leisure, it's tough to beat, in all honesty. It really is.
Yeah, having been to quite a few Formula One races in GCC countries over the last few years, I think you're right. Obviously, there's a commitment across the board to bring the world to the region, whether it's Qatar or Bahrain or Saudi or UAE, and it's obviously been impressive. A quick follow-up on that. Like, one of the more interesting things that PIF has done, in addition to funding other things and investing and being part of sports, was putting its name on a WTA ranking system on the tennis side. Now, I thought that was a fascinating development, that the fund, the Public Investment Fund, was now basically becoming part of the sponsorship game that the three of us have been part of for a very long time. I'm curious as to your thoughts. Do you think we'll see more of that? And not just ownership situations, like Bahrain Sovereign Wealth Fund owns McLaren outright. Or will we see more of the funds themselves becoming part of the story in a front-facing way like that?
Yeah, I believe they will. And they started, they also have the Indian Wells tournament, the Indian Wells event, the ATP 1000. And, when that happened and they put the logo on there, I'm like, oh, what's going on here? I'm not sure this works. But it actually does work. And I've spoken to the folks out there and the guys who are doing it. And yeah, it's just building the brand, just to say, we're here. Don't be afraid of us. We're sponsoring your sports. We're in America. It's all okay. It's all good. We're putting our name on it. And look, when Emirates sponsored the same event, Indian Wells, many, many years ago, there was some backlash locally. There was some in the local, you guys have been to Indian Wells, I'm sure, in the Palm Springs area, and quite a nice, quiet community. And then you've got this international airline based in Dubai coming over and sponsoring their event. There was some backlash, and what we found when we started our our sponsorships was that the fans and the people who had been to Dubai managed our own PR. So in other words, someone would say, "Oh, how can you let someone from the Middle East come and sponsor our events?" And then someone would write, "Well, if you haven't been there, you don't know. You can't say that. Dubai's a great place." And another person would say, "Yeah, Dubai's wonderful." And it just snowballed. So the immediate backlash was, a bit scary. But in the end, the people were doing our own positive PR, and it worked out for us. And it's going to work out for PIF. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm confident.
Well, I think we saw some of that when it came to football kit sponsorships or naming rights and things like that. An initial thing, people pushing back on sponsorship from that region. And I think you'll probably see that to some degree in the press still for a little bit, but that's part of the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, bottom line is this place is an amazing, amazing region, part of the world. It's the people here are the most hospitable, lovely people you'll ever meet. It really is a really lovely. And I'm not saying that because I have to say it or because I'm here. It's true. It's really true. And to raise my 2 children here, I couldn't have been happier to raise my 2 children anywhere else.
Yeah, and Dubai in particular is so diverse, as you've said before. I mean, I live in Manhattan, so diversity is just something that we expect and celebrate here. But, our office there in Dubai was there were people from all over the world there.
Yeah, as I said, my son played baseball, and there's kids from different. It's not just an American sport here. It's Japanese and Korean and Arab and European, and who knew the Russians played baseball? We've got 4 Russian families now over here playing baseball.
Oh no,
Belarus, and you wouldn't know these things. I'm like, oh, you guys play baseball? Yeah. I said, oh, okay. So it's great. Yeah, really, really positive place.
Greatest diplomatic tool ever created, sports.
You know what? Another good segue, Tim. We when the Abraham Accords were signed between Israel, right, and that whole situation, I was trying to, myself and my colleague in Tel Aviv with the Israeli Little League, we said, let's be the first sport to play an Israeli team to come to Dubai and play. Let's let 12-year-olds break that initial sports barrier. So we were working on this for a long time. I was even on the television station in Tel Aviv via Zoom. And it was all planned, and then we had this little pandemic that happened, and around the time of the pandemic, and that was it. It ended. It's like, oh, and then we tried to get it going, and then it never happened. And then a football team played or something, and we lost it. But that was what I wanted. Exactly what you just said, Tim. There, I wanted these kids to be the ambassadors, the goodwill ambassadors. No politics, just sport, and everybody was supportive. And then COVID.
Well, one of the positive things that for me personally that came out of the pandemic was I got to meet you through
Thank you, Tim.
through a mutual friend, Ben Sterner.
That's where we met. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So before we let you go, Roger, we have 2 questions that we ask all our guests.
Sure.
So the first one is,
where'd your career get started? Where'd you started?
how did you get your start in sports? You moved from Freeport to Dubai. You said you got a job in PR, but how'd you break into sport?
So the funny thing was when I moved to Freeport, I was running golf tournaments as a hobby. And I didn't really know it back then because I was kind of young and dumb and all that. And I was actually selling sponsorships, but I didn't know it. So I'd go to various brands. I'd say, hey, can you give us a voucher for, dinner for 4 for this tournament? And I'll put a logo up somewhere. If you got a banner, I'll throw it up. And I went around, I did this for a few years. And then I sort of figured out what I was doing. And I thought, this is kind of cool and kind of fun. And then when I moved to Dubai, I got the job at PR. My boss at the time, one of our clients was the golf. So I did all the PR comms for the golf tournament. And that's why I said I got to write, a couple of press releases about Tiger back then. It was quite fun. And that my boss, who owned the PR company, was actually an Emirates Airline executive. So he said, hey, I'm sponsorship department at Emirates. Why don't you come and join me? And I said, yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. So a bit of luck, a bit of learning on the job, using my communications background to really help kind of bridge the gap between lack of knowledge and experience to where we are today and what I'm doing.
I think it worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, thank you.
You went on to become one of the most highly regarded, and most respected people in the sponsorship industry. So,
Very kind. Thank you. Goodbye.
so the last question is, what one piece of advice would you have for a young person looking to break into the sports industry?
Don't get into the sports industry because you love sport. It's not about liking sport. That's nice. That's good to like sport. We all like sport. What I used to tell people when they would interview, or one question I would ask young people when I would interview them for a job, I would say, why do you want to work in the Emirates Airline sponsorship department? And if they said, because I love sport or I love Arsenal, that was a red flag to me. Because I thought, well, that's not why you're doing this. You're doing this because sport is a communications platform that helps tell the brand narrative about what we're going to do and how we want to do it. And it tells our holistic communications and the 360 marketing tools. And that's what I was looking for. So that's what I would advise young people is don't tell people you love sport when you want to go into sport. Use that as your passion, but try not to explain what sport does. Learn what sports does for a brand. And then the other piece of advice I'd say, I know you said one I give to, is start at agency level. And this is what I'm telling my son. Try to find something niche. Like, now it's kind of sustainability. Try to do something different, but start at the agency level because you'll learn a lot more at the agency level and you'll get different pieces of advice. And not my agency, Oliver, my son. I don't want him to work for me for another 10 years or 15 years. Let him learn the trade with someone else. And I think that's the best way to do it. Start at agency and then you figure out the landscape as you move on through your career.
Great advice. Roger, can't thank you enough for coming on. What a great perspective you bring. Safe to say, first guest from the Middle East, David?
Well, other than the time I recorded from Dubai.
Yes, but you were an interloper, a visitor there on business. You were not a denizen.
But I remember it. It was a beautiful hotel.
Well,
not surprising to Roger.
Yeah.
But yes.
There's a few over here.
Roger, thank you again. Great to have you on. Some great insights, great perspective. We look forward to our listeners being able to hear from you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our chat. Yeah, you guys are doing a great job. So keep it up.
Thank you.
Back, and normally with our guests, we get a specific perspective on an individual property or learn about an individual brand. This was interesting, Tim, I thought, because we got a very unique on-the-ground perspective about a very important region in the sports space right now, obviously the Middle East. So thank you to Roger for jumping on. That was a very interesting discussion, and he's a wonderful guy. So before we jumped on with Roger, we were about to start talking. You were about to bring up one other subject. So I wanted to throw it back to you before we do our normal close.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about ratings. When Roger jumped in, we were starting to go, and there's some fascinating stories. Where to start? NASCAR was on Amazon. Great production, great talent, not great ratings. Down 25% from the same time window last year. They went from 3.17 million last year, I believe that it was still on Fox at that point in the season, to 2.39 million. So Amazon's got some work to do to get people to tune into NASCAR on their platform. We talked before the finals started that we thought ratings were going to suffer for both the Stanley Cup Finals as well as the NBA Finals. That has come to be true. I want to talk specifically about the NBA. Game 2, 8.76 million, least watched since 2007, down 30% from last year. What I find most interesting, because we can parse numbers all day, every day, and I'm not an expert on it, but what I find fascinating is I think with the NBA, to me, I think the NBA of all the professional leagues, team sports, is the most star-driven sport.
Agreed.
But that doesn't seem to matter when you get to the finals. So you look at these finals, I think what it comes down to is market size. And even if both Indianapolis and Oklahoma City got a 90 share, it wouldn't help because the rest of the country is just not that interested. And you look at Oklahoma City with Chet Holmgren, who's a great big man, and SGA, Williams, and then you look on Indianapolis, and you look at some of, Halliburton obviously is the superstar, but Pascal Siakam and Miles Turner, great players, and it doesn't matter. And then you look on the NHL side, and you've got ostensibly the best player in the game in Connor McDavid. Doesn't matter.
So I would say a couple things in regards to that. I don't think you're wrong when it comes down to the finals and market size, but I would add a piece to that, and that's the tradition of a national following for an organization, which obviously OKC does not have, despite them. They're clearly the best team in the NBA. And the Pacers, basketball haven in the state of Indiana, but not the Knicks, not the Bulls, not the Heat, and certainly not the Lakers.
Or the Celtics.
Or the Celtics. You notice I always leave Boston out.
I hate Boston.
I don't know why I have fun. I'm hard on Boston sometimes. But yes, of course, the Celtics. So I don't think they have that. And yes, does that have something to do with market size? It certainly has something to do with market size. But we did predict this in the U.S. By the way, also as predicted, though, the ratings in Canada are doing quite well. They're getting a lot of eyeballs on that. Edmonton is a particularly popular team, probably driven somewhat by this amazing talent that we have in the league right now in Connor McDavid. I do want to say one thing about the Amazon ratings, though, and this is that issue with streaming only broadcast, if you will. It's not really broadcast, it's streaming, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And that Amazon and Apple and anyone else streaming, Netflix, is going to have to make this continue to work on making it easier and flipping around, especially for those families that are still in a traditional cable situation.
We have talked about this before. If I want to watch the Stanley Cup Finals and the Yankee game is on Yes and the Mets game is on SNY, all I've got to do is hit my last button or my favorites button, and I get there. If I want to go from the Amazon NASCAR broadcast to a similar situation, I've got to get out of the streaming platform, and it takes a minute or two, which is an eternity when it comes to switching channels. David, you and I are old enough. I was the first ever remote control. As the youngest of four, it was my job to get up and change the channel when my siblings wanted to watch something different. And I wasn't as fast as a remote control, but I wasn't as slow as going from a streaming platform to a cable network or back. Or even if I'm within ESPN Plus and I want to watch, and Cornell's men's and women's lacrosse teams are playing at the same time, it takes me 30 seconds to get from one to the other.
I'm a little quicker. I'm a little quicker than that. I'm pretty good on the remote, but yes, I understand. I'm a cord cutter, but I'm still pulling out of YouTube TV where I'm catching ESPN and Fox Sports or whatever the case may be to have to go to watch the race on Amazon. That takes a second. I have my apps and icons pretty well positioned, but still it is different. We've had people comment to that on our social media about, that being a rationale for why it's just so difficult, to watch these things. So something's going to have to change if they're going to quickly get up to the numbers that are consistent with the traditional, cable hookup, or even just someone that's able to watch through YouTube TV. But yes, we'll have to see. Anything else? Shout outs, things that you got your eyes on as we look to the next few weeks.
Just one more thing. There was a ruling that came down recently that went against front row racing and 2311 racing. We've talked about this on the show in the past. We've had Jake Laletta, president of 2311, on the show. They were suing NASCAR, these two teams, because they didn't feel the charter system was fair. It was a monopolistic behavior on the part of NASCAR. The most recent ruling that has come down went against 2311 and front row racing, and it could conceivably force them to lose their charters, which is NASCAR's version of a franchise. And so it'll be very interesting to watch, see what happens. Does this force those teams back to the table with NASCAR and to accept the terms? I'm sure they'll appeal, but what chance do they have on appeal? I don't know. So I'm going to be watching that very closely. What about you?
I agree on that. I think it's going to be fascinating what their next play is on this. It's a very important story, not just in NASCAR, but I think for what these type of organizations mean across sports. So it'll be interesting to stay close to Jake and find out what's next. I do have a couple shout outs here. I do want to say in the last show we talked about the Weenie 500 and we talked about whether Oscar Mayer was actually sold. Of course, our past guests are unbelievable. They always stay in touch with us. We very quickly got a response from Jonathan Gibson, who was on the show, who said that absolutely Oscar Mayer is served at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I have to read his quote because it's Jonathan, who was an EVP at Penske Corp. He said, "The Weenie 500 was a huge hit. Tens of millions of impressions and engagement. Frankly, it was a huge hit. We would relish the opportunity to do it again." And then, of course, as though I might not have noticed, he added, "See what I did there?" Yeah, he was very thrilled with that engagement. I think it did a lot for the race, one of the many great things. And speaking of those type of things, the Goodyear blimp turned 100. And I think you and I are of the age where we understand how much that changed the game. The way we view sports, I think the Goodyear blimp was a huge part of that, going to every major event and providing those aerial shots. So that was a huge development. So happy birthday to the Goodyear blimp and those pilots that guided around the country.
So yeah, two quick things. There are fewer Goodyear blimp pilots than there are astronauts in the NASA astronaut corps. So very, very elite fraternity there. And I just want to give a shout out to Robert Shaw, who prevented a catastrophe at the Super Bowl during the movie Black Sunday. Bruce Dern was trying to set off bombs using the Goodyear blimp at the Super Bowl between the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Robert Shaw, not only a great boat captain, but also a great anti-terrorist expert.
He was versatile in his captaining. He didn't fare so well in Jaws at the end, but...
No, but so thank God he was able to save the world during Black Sunday first, which I believe came out in 1971, a full 4 years before Jaws, and when Quint did not fare well at the end of Jaws.
I didn't expect that we would have another this soon movie time with DP and McGee, but I think we might have to.
Every week.
It might be every weekend, as it turns out. A couple other shout-outs. So I mentioned we talked about the French Open earlier. A company that I used to do some work with, CCM Sound, does the music theme, the bed, the branding via audio to the French Open and everything at Roland Garros. And it's absolutely, if you've ever watched the closing ceremonies of the French Open, it's as good as anything you'll ever see. I love the work that CCM Sound does, and I just want to do a quick shout out to Colleen Fahey, Michael Boumendil, Val Fleur, Dana Todorovich, and Lauren Cuccini, who've worked on that. Their work's a masterpiece. So anybody that ever wants to do sonic branding, they're my go-to.
What is this? An Oscar acceptance speech?
It is. I'm all geeked up. My guy won the Tony for best actor in a musical. By the way, the guy I mentioned last week. So I'm all in mode. I'm in mode right now.
I was going.
We gotta be. These are future potential partners, and I feel like I had other stuff to talk about. But okay, predictions. Let's get to our predictions. Our formal predictions for the U.S. Open this week. I am going with Jon Rahm. I continue to refuse to pick Scottie Scheffler because I think it's too easy, and I got the first one, so I could say that.
And I'm going to go with Scottie Scheffler for exactly that reason.
It's a good reason to pick
Jon Rahm, your favorite golfer, not to be confused with rom-com. Your favorite genre of movies?
No, not my favorite genre of movie. But, speaking of this, you saw the investment that MLB, I mean, we're talking about MLB so much lately. They just invested in John Boy Media.
Yeah, saw that.
Which I think was an interesting play. And John Boy is, playing after probably the same audience, but maybe without the same approach that, say, a Barstool does. But they've created quite an empire. I think they have room. I think they would definitely have room in their lineup for a great sports business podcast.
Yeah, I would not disagree with that at all. But to your point, I think it's just another example of Noah Garden and Rob Manfred trying to age down that audience, which they've done a pretty good job of over the last few years. But work still to be done because obviously I don't want to say they lost a generation of fans, but they went through a tough period for many, many years as games got longer and attention spans got shorter. And so now they've made great strides in getting younger fans back involved, and this is another step in that process, which I think is great.
Okay, it's been a very full show, a lot of stuff. We jumped around quite a bit. Again, a big thanks to Roger Duthie for joining us from Dubai, evening over on his time, so that was much appreciated. Tim, great discussion. Love it every time we are able to get together, so thank you. I want to thank everybody that listens, spends any time with us during the week, whether it's through listening on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, or watching us on YouTube or any of the other social platforms that we were on. We really do appreciate it. So until next time, I'm DP. He's McGee. We'll talk soon.